When you're working with athletes who are struggling mentally, because that's, typically why somebody would come to a mental performance coach. They're having a difficulty with their mental performance. Where do you usually start with somebody that comes to you? Is it always the same starting point, or is there some variability to that as well?
Yeah. I mean, like I mentioned, athletes to me are like a puzzle, like every human, right? So I don't believe that there's a set way of approaching each athlete. Now, having said that, I do believe that my personal approach, it kind of evolves from the same starting point. So I will ask them to when they first come in, tell me about yourself. And then, so I want to just gather tons of information. And then I do use a validated scale initially, and I just have them do that either in person. I'll give them a few minutes to go through it, or I have them do it ahead of time if they can. And that gives me general categories where they might have some weaknesses, but I don't rely on that 100%. I just use that as information for me. So it might give me things like, oh, their score was really low in coping with adversity, or maybe they are worried mostly about what others are thinking of them. So that gives me kind of a starting point. I also use a technique that's called performance profiling, where I get at the main skills mentally and physically that are going to be reflective of an elite athlete in their sport. And I have them come up with those, and then they'll kind of rank themselves on where they're at and then where they want to be. So we're identifying with them in the process some gaps that they're seeing in their own mental skills. So those are a couple things that I start out with initially, but I don't just want to jump in without knowing a little bit about them.
Okay, so I heard sort of three main tools that you use to determine where you want to start with a new athlete that's coming in and wants to work with you. The first one is just that you sit down and you kind of get to know them, right? Sort of building that rapport. Maybe you're talking about some, or potentially would be talking about some sensitive subjects. And so it helps to build that trust first when you sit down with somebody before you're asking them to talk about potentially vulnerable information. So you're just kind of sitting down and getting them comfortable and finding out some information about them. Then you're using this. The second thing I heard was now is this a peer reviewed, scientific literature validated research paper type scale? Talk to me
Yeah.
about that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's called the Athletic Coping Skills Inventory. It's a 28 question, and it just asks athlete to reflect on how they feel most of the time, all of the time, frequently, seldom. And so it just gives a basic overview. I think that there's a lot of value in that for me, just to get a snapshot picture, but I don't rely on that solely because you can't just, it's not a diagnostic tool, essentially.
So that just gives you an idea of where they might be stronger or struggling in certain common areas.
Yeah, and then I'll kind of follow up and ask them some questions and in kind of poke at those areas a little bit so that I can get a sense of like, do they really think that, or was this just something that they're filling out and they weren't really thinking through?
Okay. And then the third thing that you mentioned was another tool. Is this another scientific literature type tool? Remind me of what that third thing was again.
Yeah, it's called performance profiling. It's a technique that's been well documented in research, but visually what you would get is a wheel, kind of looks like a target, so it has different levels, and then you just identify skills, and then you have athletes identify where they're at.